Hello, hello, hello. I had such a great time listening to Tavy this morning. It's just wonderful. So great to soak in that wisdom and to hear the personal stories and to see these relationships that have been developing all these years. We are the next generation in this room. Are you aware of that? We're sitting here taking the torch over, starting to set the stage and build the future of PCM. And it's great to be in the presence of grandfathers and grandmothers. And the Lifetime Achievement Award today was a wonderful reminder of those that have paved the way for us. So we have a great opportunity and a great responsibility to take the model of process communication and prepare it for the future. Prepare it to blow up. Yeah. So in the spirit of blowing it up, I want to share with you something we're really excited about, completely unrelated. How many of you have Pocket PCM on your phone right now? That's what I'm talking about. How many of you have a smartphone with you and don't have it on your phone? Fantastic. Well, here's the information. We just released Pocket PCM, which is a smart reference guide for all the PCM. Yes, ma'am. Well, what? When Windows phones sell enough that it's worth our time. We're just invested in those two to start with. So it's available right now. It is available in 4 languages. Thank you so much from the folks from Netherlands for translating it into Dutch. Thank you for the folks from France for translating it into French for us. Thank you to Aaron and a team or a person that he worked with to translate it into Spanish. And the way that the app works is whatever language your phone is set to, if that language is supported, it will show. Otherwise, you'll see it in English. We have other translations coming along. We're very excited about it. And we want there to be a universal reference guide for these concepts around the world in every country. So we're excited about that. We're here today to talk about outcomes. The question, does PCM work? Durr. Well, let's see. Yes, it works. These are the things we've been collecting for 40 years, almost 40 years. How many of you have reams of testimonials somewhere you've been collecting? We have them. They're wonderful, and they tell an incredible story, which I don't really care about because promoter's my base, thinker's my phase. No, it's not that I don't care about them. They just don't speak to me in the same way that they maybe speak to a harmonizer or speak to a rebel. My quest has been from the beginning when I started my education, how do we measure the things that count? Being a psychologist is about somehow studying human behavior, it's so tough to put numbers around it. It's so soft, it's so touchy-feely, it's so squishy. And so I've had this quest about how do we start to document the impact of what we do, because we know it changes lives. We know it makes a difference. We see it every day in the relationships that we have. How'd that happen? Oh, I'm not going to press advance again. That'll be 50 seconds. Yeah, we're not going to go there. So how does it work? What's going on? What is the mechanism of action when PCM is doing its magical thing and changing lives? Tavy gave us a fantastic behind-the-scenes look at what are all the psychological and emotional and psychic mechanisms of action when we phase and when we go through those experiences and are transformed by that experience. Tavy did this a couple times up here. Did you see it? Good friend of ours and one of the grandfathers that many of us are inspired by is Dr. Stephen Cartman, who discovered and described the drama triangle as a way of understanding the negative relationships that we get in distress. And very quickly, for those of you that have not been exposed to the drama triangle, Stephen Cartman identified 3 roles that people play when we get into distress. One of the roles I'll start with is the role of the persecutor. This is the position, I'm okay, you're not okay. For those of us acquainted with the masks, we know that the blamer mask and the attacker mask both assume that role. I'm okay, you're not okay. For the persecutor to function, we have to have a victim to attack or to blame. So the victim plays the game by Over-adapting, using the drooper mask is what we see in PCM. And then there's that rescuer that loves to meddle, loves to try to fix, loves to get involved and take that position of, I'm okay, you're only okay if you let me try to fix you and give you advice and all those kinds of things. In the process therapy book, there's a section near the end that describes how Dr. Cartman's drama triangle roles match on to all of the levels of distress in PCM. It's a wonderful study. So what does PCM do? Well, it helps us reduce the drama of miscommunication and turn that into healthy communication and invite things besides this. Well, Dr. Cartman gave us also what he called the compassion triangle, which is a constellation of 3 competencies or skills or ways of being with each other that are the alternatives or the healthy complements to drama. If behind every mask is the positive potential and the character strengths and all of the beauty that each person brings, then what are the skills that can help take that mask off? What are the skills we see behind that? Behind the persecutor is persistence. I like to think of when I see a mask coming at me, maybe perhaps the attacker mask from a persister, like Terry would suggest, behind that mask is a person who is wonderfully persistent. They don't quit when they start things. They don't give up. When they make a promise, they follow through on it. Those are the wonderful things about being persistent. The alternative to victim is what Cartman called vulnerability. We've renamed that openness in our model, and I'll share a little bit why. Vulnerability is this amazing alternative to being a victim, because vulnerability isn't about being not okay. It's about being transparent. Resourcefulness is the alternative to rescuing. My father, some of you know I grew up overseas as a missionary kid. My father was fond of the saying that you can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. We teach him how to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life. My father introduced rabbits to tropical Africa. Rabbits is a very high-fat, high-protein, all-dark meat source of protein that was a wonderful complement to the high-starch diets that caused so much malnutrition in that part of the world. 30 years after he was last there, he returned, 2 years before he died of prostate cancer. He returned to visit some of the villages where he had worked, and he discovered that they were still raising rabbits, just like when he left, except better. They had evolved the process to even more fit into their lifestyles and utilize their natural strengths and capacities. So resourcefulness is about leveraging other people's gifts to be able to help them be successful towards the common goals. As we've been working with the compassion triangle, and in our book we play around with this a lot, we were uncomfortable with the concept of vulnerability because in our culture, in Western culture, it's often seen as a sign of weakness, that it's not okay to be vulnerable. We know what Cartman meant, and with Taby's help, we renamed it to openness. For us, openness is about this notion of transparency with self and others, about willingness to be changed and to change, about knowing that I'm okay regardless of how you respond. If I'm not open, I might hedge my bets and not be honest with you for fear of what you might say. When I'm open, what you might say does not define me. So therefore, there's this incredible freedom. I can't think of anyone in this room that epitomizes openness more than Terry. You hear him speaking about this notion of seeing the beauty behind the mask, about being willing to be changed. We took it one step further, and we asked, how do we start to quantify this notion of the transition from drama to compassion? Because that's the business we're all in, of offering PCM as a way to start understanding the drama that we find ourselves in, transforming that into positive contribution through compassion by leveraging our gifts, by getting our needs met, by utilizing our character strengths. We've developed a model. We've taken the triangle of Cartman and we've evolved it into a cycle because we believe that the skill sets of compassion don't belong in the corners of a triangle. A triangle is what happens when we find ourselves cornered. We find ourselves desperate for better solutions, putting our negative behaviors on. And a cycle is about movement. It's about positive change. It's about a never-ending upward quest. So for us, we've positioned these in a circle now, where there isn't a beginning and there isn't an end. Each one of them is necessary, but not sufficient for optimal functioning. As you can imagine, depending on my structure, there may be some of these that I will be more naturally gifted in. If harmonizer is my base, what might be a place that I would like to hang out? Openness. Yeah. For me, promoter base, resourcefulness is definitely a place I like to hang out for the whole weekend, if not the whole week. Each one of these correlates with character strengths. What we did next is we positioned the cycle inside of the triangle because for us, the notion of compassion and the notion of healthy functioning is about being centered. It's about becoming more and more in touch with the core of who we are and who we're connected with. I do a lot of training in religious communities, and when I describe the concept of a condominium and the notion that all of us have each one within us, I go one step further and say, because each of us is created to be able to connect with that part in the other. So if my sixth floor is imaginary and I connect with my sixth floor, it's not foreign to me because that part of me is now making me available to you and helping me connect with that part in you. So we are created to be connected with other people depending on the floors. This sets up a lot of possibilities that is not for today's workshop. But there's a lot that can happen here when we look at the metaphors of going in a circle and what can happen when it starts going too fast. What about these directional arrows? What might that mean? But for the purposes of measuring outcomes, we decided, how do we start quantifying the movement from openness to victim? What about from resourcefulness off to rescuer? How about from persistence into persecutor? How do we start to quantify this movement and then the movement back on? Take a look at these quotes that you read before. These are all real quotes from training participants. And when we start to look deeper for what is going on with these people, we see that they are experiencing positive growth in either becoming more open, becoming more resourceful, or becoming more persistent. Very powerful changes, and they're qualitatively different. I would imagine that a harmonizer that comes to a PCM seminar might not grow as much in openness as they might in something else. Perhaps their growth challenge or their next step is something different in order to be healthy than for me. As a promoter in a thinker phase, my learning edge is not resourcefulness. My learning edge is openness, starting to have more empathy for other people, being able to move up my condo to those other floors and experience people for who they are instead of for my agenda. So this is an interesting thing. So how would we go about beginning to quantify this? So we asked ourselves, what if we could quantify these changes? This journey from compassion to drama and back. Taby has laid out the distress sequences so we can see it second by second happening. What if we could add numbers to measure that journey? What if we could then differentiate that impact not only based on openness, resourcefulness, and persistence? What if we could differentiate that impact based on arenas of people's lives? How many of you have experienced a professional development seminar and maybe it's halfway through the first day? Maybe it's coming back in on the second day that the most powerful impact and the first impact is personal. A relationship with a spouse. They went home on the first day and used a different perception language with their daughter, and it opened up a whole new conversation that night. Have you experienced that? So when we ask, does PCM work, the question might be then, well, it depends. And how does it work in what areas of our lives? What if we could do this? And that's when NEOS was conceived. We began to try to develop, how do we start to measure this? I will have some informational flyers in the back after this if you're interested in more background on this instrument. NEOS is a 9-item. Tavy, don't you love the taglines everywhere? Just have to express my base. In our company, I'm the tagline guy. Every time we're talking about something important, I have to come up with some fancy tagline for it. NEOS is 9 items. I'll show you the instrument here in a little bit. It takes about 90 seconds to complete, and the possibilities are amazing. We'll share with you all of the stories that we can start telling with this tool. It's the world's first context-sensitive efficacy outcome system. Context meaning what area of your life? What domain are you interested in? Self-efficacy, I'll share a little bit about here in a second. Self-efficacy has been mentioned by several of the presenters so far. Muse is using this instrument to track self-efficacy to help document their commitment to building efficacy in students. Efficacy is a fancy word for effectiveness. If we ask, is this drug efficacious? What we're saying is, does it work in the way it's supposed to work? Self-efficacy is as I assess and reflect on my own capabilities, what is my level of confidence that I can rally the resources necessary to meet the demand that I perceive? It's all about perception. I perceive an expectation, a demand, a challenge, a goal. Now I reflect, self-reflect on what resources do I have to bring to this, and I make a decision about, can I? How confident am I? So self-efficacy is not a selfish concept. It's not a self-centered concept. It's simply based in this notion that humans are agentic beings. We are agents, and we can mobilize ourselves to go after the things that we want and that we care about. And a big driver of how well we do that is our belief in our own abilities to do that. Self-efficacy is very, very different than self-esteem. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to visit with you at some other time. The dead horse of self-esteem, I like to kick it every time I can. Get up, come on, kick it again. Yeah. So what our instrument does is it attempts to measure changes in self-efficacy for responding openly, resourcefully, and persistently to life conditions in multiple contexts. Say that fast 5 times. It's reliable, it's valid, and it's practical. We've done a ton of research on it, some of which you'll probably see in the PCM journal coming up in the next year or two. And we continue to collect data on it and evaluate its effectiveness. It can be used as a self-report, as you'll see in a little bit. I assess myself through my own perceptions about my capability. And my own sense of my confidence is the number one driver of what I'm going to do. It's not as important as what you think I can do. It's what I think I can do that drives my decisions. It can be used as a peer report. So maybe I'm working with children that are too young to read or understand the concepts. But as a teacher or as a parent, I can use this to assess their behavior. It can also be used as a third-party report. How many of you have heard of the concept of a 360 or 360-degree evaluation? Great. Getting multiple points of perspective on a person's behavior or a person's performance. It can be used that way as well. We have it set up to measure up to 3 contexts of a person's life. And we asked ourselves earlier, is it possible for a human being who's thinking fairly clearly to be able to anticipate their confidence in a situation in which they are currently not? What's the right grammar for that? In which not they are currently in. So, and it turns out that yes, they can. Because one of the things that makes us so wonderfully human is the ability to imagine realities that have not yet happened or that are somewhere else. If it weren't for that, we would not suffer from anxiety disorders. I've never said that before. I was like, wow, that's kind of, yes. And here's the instrument. It's difficult to appreciate what it takes to develop an instrument. Many people think, we'll have a survey, let's just ask some questions and we'll send it out. And that's how most data is collected. Creating an instrument that is valid and reliable is tough. And you know all about it, Jeff, because we spent many an hour crafting item after item after item and testing it with focus groups. These are 9 items that cover the dimensions of open, resourceful, and persistent. They are all behaviorally anchored, not because action is my favorite perception, but because behavior is the thing we can observe. It's the thing that we are assessing ourselves against at all times. For example, what is my confidence in my ability to stay motivated when things seem impossible at work, at home, and my team? These are just 3 arbitrary contexts. Number 4, what is my confidence that I can accept my failures as a necessary part of problem solving? How confident am I that I can do that at home, at work, and my team? You would be amazed at the different numbers people give. Understand both my strengths and my weaknesses. Finish what I start even if I don't want to. We've used best practice rating methodology. This is called a Likert scale. It's an 11. I used to say it's a 10-point Likert scale because it goes to 10, and some wonderfully observant thinker said it's actually an 11-point scale. Yes, it's an 11-point scale. Very simple words. No way I can. I'm definitely sure I can do that. It's about confidence. This is best practice rating methodology for getting sensitivity in how someone responds without it being too overcomplicated. The next thing is behaviorally anchored statements, like I mentioned, that are observable behaviors that can be assessed, and then finally up to 3 contexts. These are the 3 things that make this instrument very practically useful, and you'll see later all the different ways that it can help us tell a story. How do we show results? So I'm going to show you data here for the rest of the day, and Ryan and I are very excited about this, about data. So the 9 items, people will rate from 0 to 10, and we will calculate the 3 scale scores. You might have figured out there's 3 items for each of the 3 scales. Our algorithm isn't quite as sophisticated as Tavy's. For any given interval, maybe it's before the training and to the end of the training. Maybe it's you're working with, you're coaching someone with PCM, and it's from the first time you meet them until 6 months later, whatever the engagement has been, the course of treatment or the course of intervention. There are many ways you can analyze data. We've chosen to use what's called an effect size. And an effect size is it expresses the amount of change and the direction of change translated into what are called standard deviation units. A typical normal curve might be the distribution of results for a particular point in time. If we all completed the instrument right now and aggregated our results, it would be some kind of a curvilinear, no, it'd be a curve. It might not be a normal curve, but they would distribute themselves. And then we did it again at another time, and the curve is over here. Effect size basically answers the question, how far did it go and how significant was that change? Well, what's in a number? All the data will show you. This is the way to interpret these numbers. An effect size of 0.25 is considered small or educationally significant. Not that you educators are doing small stuff. It just means that somebody learned something. Hey, I had a good takeaway from today's workshop. I learned something about myself. 0.5 is called medium, and that is clinically significant. Clinically means something happened inside of me. A key belief system was changed. Maybe an epiphany about myself or about how I relate to other people. 8 is called large and profound. We named it the wow factor. I know, Joe and Judy, you've seen testimonials that said every teacher in the world should have PCM. You know those? I'm going back and telling my CEO that they have to hire you. Those are the kinds of things we want to hear. Generally, what we've seen is those types of testimonials don't happen or they start to happen when effect sizes get to 0.8 and above. Below, people say things like, this was a valuable workshop. I learned some great new things that I'm going to take home and apply. So that is the context within which we'll interpret data going forward here. Any questions about the instrument itself, the items, how we look at scores? Yes, Taby? Sure. Taby asked to explain more about reliability and validity. Reliability has several components. Basically, what the question is the instrument performing in a consistent way? If I had a thermometer to measure my children's temperature when they had a fever, I would want it to be reliable, meaning that each time I use it, 99 means 99. Or in Celsius, what number would you be looking for? 37. And that's very important. So reliability is about the consistency of performance of an instrument. Validity has to do with, is it measuring what it purports to measure, what it is supposed to measure? If I put the thermometer in my daughter's ear and it came back and said 47 kilograms, it's not measuring what it's supposed to measure. We want to know that if I am measuring openness and I say that I'm measuring openness, is it really? And so that's what validity is very, very briefly. Other questions? Yes? Thank you. That's a good question. Tony's question was, in the research that she's read, there's usually a control group and an experimental group, where one group gets the intervention, the other one doesn't. That is very important research methodology. However, it doesn't relate to the instrument. The instrument measures things. How you go about determining whether your intervention was what's responsible for the change has to do with how you set that up. Yeah. I'm going to share with you data from friends and clients of ours worldwide that are using this instrument. And the first one has to do with work that Andrea and Werner are doing with the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. We partnered with them probably over 2 years ago to do a fairly comprehensive study of work that they were doing, teaching surgeons about PCM. And they were very keen to start being systematic about measuring the impact because the stakes, the opportunities and the possibilities were fairly large. And so I've asked Werner to say, very briefly come up and tell us a little bit of context about this before we share with you the results. Thank you, Werner.
Also, ich habe natürlich jetzt wahnsinnig gefreut, dass ich jetzt ein bisschen wieder mal auf Schweizerdeutsch reden kann. Guys, don't you panic. I'm going to use the elevator now, okay? Having used the medical field as a user, as a customer, it was very interesting for me to learn a lot of things going into that landscape in a very different function. It's a hugely diverse, a very rich variety of silo landscapes. And we learned a whole heap of different things that we had to cope with. First of all, there are so many different cultures in there. There are so many goals. Just to give you an idea, if you become a doctor, you probably want to save lives, okay? If you look at the KPIs of one of the New Zealand's hospitals, for example, then one of the KPIs is throughput. It doesn't matter whether the throughput that comes out at the end is alive or dead. It's throughput, that's the KPI. So we're looking at very different cultures, very different things that they're looking for. And sometimes it's really astonishing what you're confronted with. The more you get into the system, then the more you also see how very helpful PCM can be to overcome those very old, very deeply rooted myths that exist between the different professional groups. There are myths amongst the nurses about the doctors, there are myths amongst the anesthetists about the surgeons and vice versa. And we were able in a way to help each of those groups to have a different understanding of those myths and have a different understanding how they function. To give you an idea of what kind of problems we envisage in that, or case studies that we come across is, for example, we have the College of Surgeons regularly sends youngsters that are in the training, and for those who are not familiar with medical training, what you do is you go about 7 years to university, you get your degree, then you go 2 years to the hospital where they basically tell the doctors that the doctor is vertical and the patient is horizontal and tell you where the toilets are. After 2 years, you decide whether you want to become a psychiatrist, a GP, or a neurosurgeon, or whatever, and then you apply to one of these institutions that take you through the roughly 5-year specialty training. Now, in Australia and New Zealand, it's done by the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. It's done by the Australian New Zealand College of Anaesthetists, by the Royal Australasian College of GPs, etc., etc. So you apply at those colleges, and then you go through a recruitment process, and then you're fed into the system. If you survive the 5 years, you come out as what they call a fellow, and then you're a qualified surgeon, and you can start to work on your own. During those 5 years, the surgeons, for example, they do some work that we would compare with doing about 2 master degrees at the same time. It's a tremendous amount of work. It's very tough. The college sends people to us, for example, after 3 years of their specialty training, where the college says, unless you fundamentally change your communication habits, you're going to be out. That means somebody has invested 7 years going to university, going through med school, has invested 2 years at a hospital, has invested 3 other years to go through the College of Surgeons, being told that if the communication skills do not improve, your training is going to be terminated. What a waste of investment. Mm-hmm. So these guys come to us, and imagine we're looking at a young, incredibly intelligent woman, and her profile looks workaholic, 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 workaholic. And she's looking at her profile, and she got a lot of complaints by nurses around the operating theater and charge nurses. She looks at her profile and says, why the hell should I be nice? What's the purpose of being nice? To give you an idea. The communication issues, to make these people understand that it's important to energize, even if the harmonizer is just about 3 millimeters wide, to be able to energize that harmonizer and to get those things going. To give you another example, there was a real fight between an anesthetist and a surgeon. The anesthetist goes into his 2nd degree rebel distress, and he does this, what Taby showed us this morning. He does this. So he starts to inject fish oil into the surgeon's green rubber boots to the point where the surgeon, over a body that he's operating on, complains to the other people in the operating theater that his family is complaining about his stinky feet, and he has no clue why his stinky feet. And behind the green cloth, you have the anesthetist that's laughing like hell. The next stage, the anesthetist takes the 2 green rubber boots of the surgeon and screws them down on the shelf and watches when the surgeon runs in. And this is a senior academic and a family father in distress. And he watches when the anesthetist runs in and tries to grab his rubber boots, under pressure. 3rd stage is he cuts off the sole and screws down the sole and puts the empty shafts on top and watches when the surgeon... This is a family father, an adult, and academic, okay? That's the kind of distress levels that you might see coming out of the aviation industry, where we are used to work with pressure.
What will you give us the things you were looking for?
Yeah, just thank you. I told you I need 2 minutes.
Yes.
in a nutshell, it is such a stressful environment that usually a lot of people in hospitals starting at 9 a.m., many of them are already in their bad place. So it is extremely helpful what PCM can do to them. Now, as we had an inroad, and meanwhile, all the medical colleges in Australasia have adopted PCM into their continuous professional development. And the College of Surgeons this year, for the first time, puts PCM into the first year of the 5-year specialty training, which means if this is going to work, that means in the future all the surgeons will have PCM in their first year of their 5-year specialty training.
Yes.
Now, the College of Surgeons was, of course, as you can imagine, pretty critical, and for us it's a huge privilege to run these courses with surgeons and doctors because they do not buy anything until you can tell them or can give them the proof, okay? It has to be, any information that you give away has to be bulletproof and watertight. So you have to be able to answer all these questions. So the College of Surgeons was not just happy by their surgeons walking away after 3 days of a course going into this wow. They actually wanted to know what is the effect after 5 and 7 weeks. And I conclude that with saying, I think the one thing that got them really interested was that surgeons, after 5-6 weeks, said, and there was no other measure taken or no other onward training given, follow-up training given, they said after some 5 to 7 weeks that the ability to avoid undesired outcomes, that ability was even greater after 5 to 7 weeks than right after the course. And that was significant.
Thank you. Thank
Many
you.
more stories, but hand over back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the challenge is, we know we have something that works. They've given us a chance. They're investing their energy and their time, and we want to translate those wonderful testimonials into the language of the people that are paying the bills and making the decisions. So it's not unlike what we're teaching ourselves to do in PCM. Well, here's the data. Tavy, look at this. For openness, we looked at the effect sizes in 4 contexts. We allowed 4 contexts for this. The first one is openness at home. And let's take a look. The effect size was about 1.1, which is unbelievable. It's way past wow. So the impact of this program on their ability to be transparent in a healthy way at home went through the roof. Openness in the operating theater, when they're in there doing their surgeon work. Again, over 1. With administrators in public health, this was a very difficult relationship. Surgeons with administrators in public hospitals, very difficult. And that was identified ahead of time as one of the major problems that they wanted to address, was that level of communication and collegiality between those professions. Big increase here. And then in private practice for those surgeons that were working in a private setting. Here are the persistence effect sizes. Now, when you heard Werner talk about what these doctors are going through and what they've had to do, my guess is their persistence is already quite developed. We might not expect that to be where the learning edge is or where the growth needs to happen. And not as big and still quite significant. The most significant was at home. My persistence was sticking with the things that are hard, following through on what I promise at home. In the operating theater and in private practice, the lower, all of them were at least medium or above. Resourcefulness, creative problem solving, thinking outside the box, trying different approaches, not getting stuck into one thing, being willing to let go and move on if something's not working. Great changes in effect sizes there. All of them were at over 0.8. So this is compelling data with a lot of data points to say people are getting more confident in the things that matter. Yes?
Could you please explain what 1 means on the Likert scale? So if I tick 5 in the first instance, I have to tick 10 in the second instance to get a 1, or how does it correct?
Thank you. The question is, what type of a score on the NEOS would give you these effect sizes? It can't be translated because the absolute score is not relevant. The change in score is what counts, and the consistency of that change from person to person to person to person. If 1,000 people averaged a score of 8.2 at the beginning and 8.8 at the end, it would be an effect size of probably well over 1.0 because of the consistency of the positive change.
Two quick questions. What was the sample?
May I, before I answer that, did that help? Did that help? There is no absolute score that will tell you that. It all has to do with the numbers of participants and what's called the standard deviation, which is the consistency of those scores. Yeah.
Okay, I'll reframe my question.
Yeah.
How many participants was this administered to, and what were the two sequences, time 1, time 2?
Thank you. How many participants overall?
I don't know which.
This is all the way through 5. We didn't do, 6 is not included.
Okay, so that would be about 75.
75 participants. Time, this was at the beginning and the end of, I believe this was all the way to 6 weeks. I'm thinking, or was this?
It's only part 1 course, so it will be at the beginning and 4 weeks later, 4 or 5 weeks later.
At the beginning and then 4 or 5 weeks after the end. That's the time frame. Thanks. That's important to know when we're looking at that data. Thank you. Yeah. Go in and observe. Will you say more?
Observe the behaviors.
That's a question for you. Were there behavioral observations of these physicians?
Not through us, no.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that things change.
That would make a great study.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities for study.
Elliot, would you share with us an example of what behavior could be observed that would validate any of these if I was watching that surgeon?
How people are working together, whether or not when an uncertainty comes up in an operation, I'm assuming, how are they dealing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Werner.
Can I just shed light a little bit about these behaviors?
Very briefly. We have Werner, we have lots of data I want to share. But yeah.
And all this time in aviation, talking about high-risk environment. In aviation, we have technical skills, and then people crash airplanes. And then we found out that it's not the technology or the procedural location, it's people. So we developed non-technical skills. Rona Flynn at the university derived from non-technical skills in aviation, non-technical skills in anesthesia, and in surgery they have been validated and they are in place. All these systems of non-technical skills by design completely bypass the individuality. And we can establish fantastic procedures and check these procedures, and they're there, like in aviation, but pilots still crash airplanes.
Well, no, I can talk to you about it. I can talk to you a lot about aviation. I'd love to, but there's all kinds of variability aside from these pieces that go into what goes on in that room. And it's a good. I like it. But I'm just curious about the observational piece.
Let's keep going. We have some. There's more. There's more. Yeah. So Joe and Judy teach a course at Cal State San Marcos. You've been doing it for how long? 2002. Every year? Teach the course. I've asked them to just briefly give a little description of why are you laughing? To give us a bit of a context about what is it that we're measuring here and what are they doing. Would either of you like to, would you share something?
Sure, we did two.
Here, make sure they can hear.
We did at home and in the classroom. These are all graduate teachers working for their master's or their doctorate at Cal State San Marcos. I'm in the
That's me, sorry.
feedback here.
That's me.
Yeah. And we gave it to them at the beginning, and we gave it to them at the end of a 3-day, well, actually, it's a 3-credit graduate course, so it's 5 9-hour days. And so we gave it to them at the beginning and at the end of the 5th day. I think that's probably.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. This is a little bit more discrete situation. I might also add, Elliot, that in almost all of the data, I'm only sharing the NEOS data. We collect a lot of data on other things. I'm just showing the NEOS data to illustrate how the tool works. So here's an example of from the beginning to the end of that time frame that Judy mentioned. What do we see? And here we have just 2 contexts, at home and at work. And at quick glance, we can see that the impact at work was more significant than the impact at home. And at home, the impact on resourcefulness and persistence were the strong ones. At work, openness was significantly more impacted by this very same training that they participated in. It's fascinating. Starts to tell a story. Of course, I get to the point where I look at these graphs and I see stories and I see images about what might be going on, and it leads to such wonderful next questions. One of our beliefs is that great data asks more questions than it answers. We just finished conducting a 3-day public seminar. Your typical 3-day core topics, beginning to the end. What was unique about this group is it was all educators from one school system. We had the superintendent in the room, and 4 or 5 people she had selected because they needed to come. Newton. And the impacts are not, I wouldn't put this on our website to advertise for the 3-day. It's way lower than almost, our averages for our seminars are between 0.7 and 1.2, 1.3. So this is below our typical averages. That's helpful too because we can go back and say, okay, why? What's going on? What might we know about this text that could explain this? And definitely a situation where there was not a lot of people willing to disclose and practice and talk for fear of messing up in front of the superintendent. Yeah. And here is what's kind of neat, though. They went home and tried some things and were open to some things. Yeah, Randlin?
What's the time frame between participation in the seminar and tracking?
This is just at the beginning and the end of the seminar. In other situations, we might do 6 weeks later, 4 weeks later as well. And this is just before and after the seminar. Yeah.
Is this a homogeneous group that all the teachers have come from the same school or not?
The question is, this is a homogeneous group. In this case, yes, all people from the same school system.
And ours were not.
Yours were not. Students that could be teaching anywhere. Yeah.
From many different schools.
We are blessed to be working with a wonderful group of people in Minnesota, ID 287. And I put that up there. I found that. That's awesome on your website. And we have, some of you attended the presentation yesterday about what they're doing and how they've implemented PCM. It's been incredible to work with them. And their creativity and their passion and their willingness to run with this material and support their people with it has been outstanding. I've asked Jenny to come and say, Jenny Nelson, to say a little bit about what we did with them and what data you'll be looking at. Thanks, Jenny.
Hi, Harmonizer. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, thanks.
Can I stand here?
I'll give you a little background about our school district, and then I'll bring in the next element, arrival. We are an intermediate school district, which is a public school district. We provide services throughout Minnesota. However, we have 12 school districts, public school districts that are our member districts, and they buy our services. We provide over 120 services to more than 10,000 students in Minnesota, and actually we have a few outside of Minnesota. Very highly specialized. So when we have schools within our system, and then we send our services out to schools that exist already. We have very high emotional challenged students, behavioral challenged students, cognitively delayed mental illnesses, therapy setting, treatment settings, you name it, the most challenging, we've got it. Which also means that sometimes the adults come with a couple of challenges along the way. So when I came to the district just about 3 years ago, and came with the notion already of self-efficacy, and that's how we got connected with Next Element. And we started with self-efficacy and this idea that no matter what your role is, if you feel confident that you can improve what you're doing, eventually that will affect what the students will be able to accomplish and how we interact with each other. So we started with the adults, and of all of our groups in the system, the group that latched onto it the most is our administrative services. Our facilities workers, our payroll people, human resources, all the people who provide those type of services really felt that their adult-to-adult interactions could be more self-efficacious, or they could use some to be more open, resourceful, and persistent. So Nate came and he did a session on self-efficacy and introduced us to PCM, and it has caught fire. We are on fire in Minnesota. And we have trained about 190 staff. They have taken their inventories. We have about 800 staff altogether, and I just presented at a national conference, and now we have some of our member districts interested because it happened to take place in Minneapolis. And then we're getting interest from outside people too, because it isn't very common for a whole public school district to be embracing this notion. So Nate will take you through some of the results that we have a group of people who need to increase their self-efficacy in order to keep doing the tough work that they do every day, and I think we're doing it.
Yes, thank you. Beautiful. I'll show you. Yeah, I'll show you. Jenny reminded me of something about self-efficacy I meant to say earlier. Self-efficacy occurs on a continuum for all of us. Our level of confidence is on a continuum. However, there's something interesting. There's this magical point somewhere along that continuum where if I am below it, I won't try. And if I'm above it, I will try. And what's fascinating about this, we see this with adults practicing channels. We see this with children, whether they're going to apply themselves or not, when we know that they can. Have you been in a training or with a child, you're trying to teach a concept and you know they're capable and they won't try? It's about efficacy. It's about they don't believe that they can, and so they don't try. And it's only when we begin trying that the world starts to change for us. And that's not just true for rebels in first degree. It's a fascinating concept, and one of the beauties of the order in which Taby has structured the seminars is they are structured to build self-efficacy by the way in which they're ordered. And when we teach the principles of self-efficacy, we apply those to how we maneuver the nuance of training to be able to maximize a person's belief in their capability to try and learn the new skills that we're teaching. So here's what we have. This is just the folks that completed the 3-day, and we see here again openness at work. What a wonderful, incredible impact on this sense of collegiality and team unity, that we're all in this together, working together. And similarly at home, large changes there. All of them are between medium and large. Well, the more you learn, the better it gets. Like peeling this onion of PCM. Jenny and her team don't just stop at finishing a seminar. That's just where it begins. Now let's provide reinforcement and support and coaching. So what we looked at is what would happen if we presented the 3-day not all in one time. We've done a lot of experimenting with different ways of delivering the same seminar just by how we break it up. In this case, Jamie went to Minnesota on 3 different occasions for 1 day, about a month apart. Is that right? Day 1, and then there was homework things, practice what we learned, work on what we covered, and then we'll be back. And she did the 2nd day and then the 3rd day. And at 4-week follow-up, we also looked at this. And here's what we have. With only one exception, I believe, every single situation there was an increase from the 1st day to the 2nd to the 3rd day to 4 weeks later. And the beauty of this was that even 4 weeks after completion of the seminar, their efficacy was continuing to rise in being able to manifest these skill sets. Here's another interesting thing. If we had data like this for 3-day PCM seminars for 5,000 people, we could start concluding what is the relative impact of each day of training. Where do the biggest jumps come? What if we correlated with personality phase? What if persisters made their big increase on day 3 and harmonizers on day 1? What does that mean? What if we tinkered with the order just a little bit and experimented with what it would do with a person with persistence? But we won't, without asking. It allows us, we call it biofeedback for your program. We're tracking all the time, so when we make little modifications, we can see what happens. Yeah?
Have you done a comparison between doing it this way and doing a 3-day and measuring each day of a 3-day block?
No. The question is, have we compared the two? We have compared them beginning to end with each format. And we have that data, I believe we have that published on our website. It's possible to study that. Well, let's look at the lasting impact, because they didn't stop there. They just are always busy at work figuring out ways to support and grow and implement and expand the impact. So in the meantime, 6 to 9 months after their initial training, where were people at? And at this point, 49 staff who had completed PEM. There's your answer, Rebecca. 34 had attended the 3-day, 17 had attended the 1-day, and these were the type of support activities that were going on. Much like what Jeff described yesterday about how they continue to support proficiency and confidence in using the material. 3 trainers, I certified 3 people from the system who are now, it was 49, now it's 190, and it's beautiful. Role-playing, book study, review sessions, one-on-one coaching, all kinds of support for these people. And then we constructed a survey to assess impact in 12 behavioral key impact areas of PCM. And this is what we found, or this is what they found. How many people endorsed that they had experienced a positive impact in these different areas? 86% of these people said it improved their verbal communication with coworkers. 51% written communication, and we go on down the list. You can read them. In the spirit of personality diversity, the last one is particularly exciting for me, that PCM is a wonderful way to build tolerance for diversity, tolerance for different kinds of people. So this is professional impact. Here's personal impact. Yeah.
Can I add something to the slide before?
Sure.
This came up in our session too, just to let you know that very few of these staff work directly with students, so for it to have a 16% impact, that makes complete sense. They were in contact with adults, not students.
Personal impact. That's significant. That's the kind of stuff that changes the world. When I can talk differently to my teacher, or I can coach my child on how to respond differently to a bully in the classroom. Those kinds of things are so significant. Any questions for Jenny or her crew about the work they're doing in Minnesota? Yeah.
How have the administration that y'all work with, how have they accepted this program?
More than anything, the administrators were the ones initially who decided this is the direction we're going to go, and they are still on board.
Like Jeff said, we have had a relationship with Muse since the beginning. And very early on, it was their vision and commitment to begin collecting data on this mission, this persister-sister dream. And we have all this great vision and everything. Does it work? Is it making a practical, meaningful difference in people's lives? One of the things, I wrote a blog recently called Vision Has No Accountability. And the notion is that if I have a vision, or if I have a belief system and I'm living according to my belief, that's great. What if I'm trying to make a difference in the world? That's accountability. How is my vision and the living of my beliefs changing lives, making a difference? If my goal is sustainability, what percentage of our students are using the water bottles instead of bringing single-use cups to campus? That's accountability. So we started measuring. And so I want to share with you some data from a comprehensive outcomes measurement work that we did for about 2 full years here while the school was getting going and starting to get rolling. And we looked at teacher self-efficacy, parent self-efficacy, and student self-efficacy simultaneously as this was being implemented. Here is 18 months of data looking at changes in the 3 scales of NEOS over time as Muse began to implement PCM. Pretty powerful story about what's going on. Although the trajectories are a little bit different, overall, all 3 scales gained significantly and started to level off at a pretty high place over time. Now, this is in the context of with peers, so we're asking them, how confident are you in being open, resourceful, and persistent with these co-teachers that we're in this together, we're building this thing, we're holding each other accountable? What about at home? As they're learning these skills of PCM and beginning to implement them in all areas of their life, I was so excited, it was still going up after 18 months. With students. One of the single strongest predictors of student achievement is teacher self-efficacy. Say that again. One of the strongest predictors of student achievement is teacher self-efficacy. So when we invest in our teachers and we support them in feeling confident in their roles and confident in their abilities to connect and motivate and resolve conflict with the children, that is directly impacting the achievement of the kids. Get this to change. So we asked a question, can a teacher's personality structure affect student efficacy? Well, we asked teachers to rate student efficacy. The children that were too young to do it themselves, this instrument is rated for about 6th grade on up, 6th grade reading level. And below that, the only option we had was to have parents evaluate their children and for teachers to evaluate the students. And we took a look at teacher evaluations of students. I want to share with you 2 case studies that illustrate some things that we found out and that we helped the founders of Muse discover in order to make some positive changes. Here is a situation we'll call Betty. This is a real student that we tracked. And we looked at the changes in self-efficacy over time for Betty over the course of the same time frame, roughly. General increase, there's little ups and downs, and we see it starting to go. If I would just look at this, I would think, great, Betty is starting to benefit from this this place? Well, these little letters, a little secret here is that the letters represent the teachers who rated Betty. You see anything? Which teacher do you want? What we know is one of the drivers of self-efficacy is what we call social persuasion and support. My belief in you is one of the strongest drivers of you and your performance. So these teachers are observing these children. And it looks like B is rating pretty high self-efficacy. C is kind of hitting the low points consistently. Overall, Betty had a 21% increase in openness, 60% in resourcefulness, and 110% increase in persistence over the course of these 18 months. Now, if we looked at Betty's structure, we can start looking at the relationships between her structure and her becoming responsible for who she is as a course of this process. Now, here's another case study. This is Jerry. Jerry also was rated by several different teachers, and look what happened. Now, this is significant. Look at these scores, 1s and 2s. And teacher B is the one consistently perceiving her as being unefficacious and incapable. This is not a good story. If we... The last 4 right here? I don't know. I don't know why the data's not on there.
I mean, if the 3 of them, that's really bad. If all 3 of them were down there.
B was in charge at this point. I don't think A was around. I don't know who did that. Now, you've met Jerry because Jerry is really Claire, who is Susie's daughter, the imaginer. Susie told you the story yesterday about Claire and what started to happen and some of the changes that they made and starting to say, we have to truly hold teachers accountable for meeting every student's needs. So the Persister sisters started saying, we got to get to every floor if this is going to be effective. And Claire has thrived since. Oh, she's up here in the rafters. She's up on the mountain somewhere. And Claire has thrived. It's her teacher. So this is significant when we start looking at this data and starting to craft stories about what's going on here and how important it is for teachers to be skilled and held accountable and empowered to be able to use these skills. So to summarize, things that we're learning from our work with self-efficacy and with the NEOS in education is that teacher structure, more importantly though, their agility within their condominium is the most important thing. Yeah. Agility means ability to move around. An agile person can be in different positions, can be effective over here and can do this. So personality agility. And what would predict agility from a PCM perspective? Bandwidth is one. And what precedes bandwidth? Getting our psychological needs met. When we have those met, we can experience and grow and learn and develop these other parts of our personality and begin decorating those rooms in our house. Yeah.
May I have a quick question? Can you just go back to the previous slide? It's just a quick question. Teacher B.
Yes.
Is that based on his or her observed perception of Claire, or is it expectation? Because I think there's a distinction there.
Thank you. Dennis, right?
Not the signatory, yeah.
Dennis's question is, what is this based on? I'm going to show you without saying anything. That's what it's based on. This is what the teacher is looking through when this teacher sees Claire. Probably thinker, help me out, probably thinker or persister phase teacher. Harmonizer, phase persister. So this is a teacher that wants to connect with her, do the huggy-feely things, and from the... Yeah, look at me. Yeah. And from her phase distress is interpreting Claire as unmotivated, doesn't take any initiative, lazy, on and on and on. Can't look teachers in the eye, doesn't have respect, and on we can go about the interpretation of someone else's behavior through that lens. Did that?
So, I think what I hear you saying is that there's other contextual information you're using in addition to this.
Yes. Yes, just the NEOS data. And we could say, well, that's skewed. Does that matter? Because look what happened. Perception becomes reality. Perception is reality for us. So our second, reviewing just again, our second thing that we know is that teacher self-efficacy is a strong predictor of student success. So our ability to help teachers feel confident in their abilities around PCM as well as other things is a powerful driver of student achievement, which is one of the core, the two of the 5 cores at Muse. So personality, agility, and self-efficacy go hand in hand. We can't separate them. We could almost say that self-efficacy is the process of process. It's how we get good at process. It's through building our confidence in each other, and becoming good at process helps us build confidence in ourselves. So we're here to preach to the choir, which is to say that when teachers are taught and held accountable and develop to be confident in these things, that we can improve student achievement and help celebrate the youth for who they are. Well, I'll just leave you with this and say thank you very much. Very much. Thank you.